and good to have you with us on this edition of the Urban Debate. Over the next 90 minutes, viewers, we are going to answer 10 key questions regarding the India-China clash and its impact. But before that, I want to say a few words. I want to tell you about Sipahi Kundar Kumar Ojha. Kundan was martyred in Galwan in the clash, the brutal, violent, bloody clash that took place on Monday night. Sipahi Kundan had been blessed with a daughter just 17 days ago. He hailed from Bhojpur district of Bihar. The family, of course, is heartbroken, but they claim, even at this time, they're extremely proud of what their son has done. Sipahi Rajesh Orang, he hailed from Birbhum in Bengal. Rajesh was a youngster who had just visited his family about a month and a half ago before he got called in as tension escalated in Ladakh. Rajesh's family was excited. They had already begun talks for his wedding. They were looking out. Those conversations were on. A few days ago, his brother got a call from Sipahi Rajesh where he was told that the call of duty is here, that he will be climbing up. And he wasn't sure when he will come back. He asked his brother to take care of Ma and Ba. Those were the last words to his brother. Sipahi Aman Kumar's family in Bihar and Samastipur is extremely proud. But Aman Kumar's father, despite losing his son in the line of duty, wants his younger son to now join the army. Not only that, this family has a tradition of serving the country. Aman Kumar's elder sister is actually a police constable in the state of Bihar. Havaldar Palani, a 40-year-old soldier who spent most of his life in this one regiment hailing from Ramanathapuram in Tamil Nadu. He skipped his birthday and his housewarming ceremony, which was supposed to be on June 3rd, which was also the time he last spoke to his family and to his wife. That call, that last call, lasted just 4 minutes on a day that otherwise he would have been with his family. About 100 kilometers from Jamshedpur is Bagargoda Tehsil. From there hailed martyr Ganesh Hansta. Ganesh belonged to a tribal family, viewers, and he had joined the army only 2 years ago. A young soldier, a young brave heart, lost tonight. His entire village is in a state of shock. The soldier not only brought pride to his family, but to the entire nation. Martyr Chandrakant Pradhan, who suffered serious injuries and later on succumbed, his entire district in Odisha is in a state of shock. Chandrakant is survived by old parents and 4 sisters, and he was the only earning member of this family. Each and every story of those 20 martyrs is as painful, is as gut-wrenching, and I'm only telling you this because I am extremely proud of these families and these young soldiers, those who even served for a while in the army. And I wish tonight, as you wrap up your day, like me sitting in the comforts of your home, you send a prayer to their families. Don't believe in prayers? You send some good wishes. You send some strength to these families as the nation pays tribute to them. For now, let's move on and let's talk about what happens now. What happens now that we have lost 20 of our soldiers and many others are seriously injured? Let me quickly take you through what has been happening all of today, get you up to speed with the latest developments. The Army, Navy and the Air Force are currently on high alert. Prime Minister Modi spoke, said the sacrifice will not go in vain. He said, we don't like to turn differences into dispute, but if provoked, we will give a befitting reply whenever it is needed. India and India's External Affairs Minister took up the matter with his Chinese counterpart And the message was straight and direct, that this was a premeditated, a planned action by China after agreeing to disengagement. That the Chinese actually went ahead and set up a structure on Indian side of the line of actual control. And what happened subsequently is China's fault. They must take corrective steps, thereby saying they must withdraw. There are talks happening not just at the political government level, but also at the military level. For the next 90 minutes, these are the 10 questions that I will be asking my experts. These are the 10 questions that we believe all of us should know the answers to. We must know this information for us to understand what exactly is going on. Question number 1. We speak about what the Prime Minister has said today and what his message really signifies. Question number 2. How should the political leadership now respond? We've picked up the phone, called up the Chinese, told them where we stand. From here on, what happens next? Question number 3. I want to talk a little bit more about the details of the clash that have emerged. The scale of the casualties. What does that signify, and tell us about the kind of fight that took place on ground. Question number 5. How does the terrain make this battle even more tough? Being there at that location, at that altitude. What does that do for a soldier who's fighting in that scenario? Question number 6. What about the rest of the border areas along the line of actual control? India shares quite a bit of it with China. Question number 7. How much will this impact India-China ties? The MEA statement says it will have a serious impact. But what kind? To what extent? How much? Question number 8. What are the geopolitical stakes in this relation of India and China if things are going to change? What all could change? Question number 9. Is it tougher to deal with China than Pakistan? We're all very used to our comments, our stand, our reaction to when Pakistan behaves with us. What happens when it's China instead? And question number 10. Has Galwan Valley historically been a dispute? There are some reports that say that China is now saying it is part of their sovereign. How and when did this happen? So let's, without wasting any further time, say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now. Lieutenant General DS Hooda, former Northern Army Commander, joins us this evening. Thank you so much for being with us. Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, thank you so much again for joining us. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat with us, and Snehesh Philip, Senior Associate Editor. I just want to go across to Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar first on the first question, which is, how do we read what the Prime Minister said today? What does this message, this address really signify?
I think this is a very stark message, a stark warning, if I could say, to the Chinese, that what has happened was unexpected, unanticipated, but now that it appears it was premeditated, because the colonel, the commanding officer of the Bihar regiment that he went in there, he went with a small number of soldiers, troops, basically to tell the Chinese that they were still at patrolling point 14 and they needed to move back. But they appeared all to be prepared for them, and they let loose with rods, with iron rods, with studded rods, with nails, and that is what led to the casualties on the Indian side. Now, the Chinese have not as yet revealed what were the casualties on their side. Obviously, there were much more than what has happened in India, what the martyrdom of our 20 soldiers. Some reports seem to indicate that the number was 43. Some of the satellite images from the United States that said that there were 35 Chinese who were killed. The exact numbers are not known, but obviously, since the Chinese have not come clean on this, the numbers there would be very large. So I think first, if you have to understand that right from the word go, from the 5th and 6th of May, when this whole thing started, this did appear as if it was something very different from what had taken place in the past, whether it was in 2013 in the Depsang Valley, in 2014 in Chumar, or even in Doklam. There were a smaller number of people, and there were not so much of premeditated, coordinated action. Right now, what we saw was that at multiple points, whether it was in Galwan Valley, Hot Springs, or in the Pangong Lake, or even in Natula in Sikkim, all these people had
Hmm.
come. They were not in small numbers, not in groups of 10 or 15. They were in hundreds and thousands. They came with heavy equipment. They came with tanks. They came with armored personal carriers. They came with artillery. And they came and they established permanent structures there. So obviously, this was very, very different from what has been happening in the past. And when we were hopeful that when the two corps commanders met on the 6th of June, that this gradual de-escalation and disengagement would take place. And what has happened on the evening of the
Hmm.
15th was very unfortunate. But I think this really,
Correct.
in my view, marks a watershed in our bilateral relations. And I think that has been said in so many words by the External Affairs Minister in the press release that has come out, that this will have a very serious impact on our bilateral ties. Of course, that is one of your questions as to how this is going to impact,
Correct.
and that is what we can discuss going forward. But I think this is the message for China from the Prime Minister and also from the conversation of Dr. Jaishankar with Wang Yi, is that it cannot be business as usual,
Okay.
and China will have to pay for what it has done.
General
Yes.
Hooda, let me also ask you this question, because the Prime Minister said, when provoked, we will give a fitting reply. We cannot compromise on India's integrity. Now, it's also meant for us to feel good about the fact that we're not just going to let the Chinese off the hook. And if they attack us, there will be a fitting reply. But just how does it play out on ground? You have a lot of experience in that area. What's your own sense? How do we read this?
So Tanvi, I'm very happy to see the Prime Minister's message. My own feeling has been that we've tried to underplay this thing from the time that it started, and saying that things will get better. It was obvious, as Mr. Sajjanhar has pointed out, that from the time that they came in, this was a completely different kind of situation from the past. How do we go forward from here? I think we need to, at different levels, show our resolve. So politically, I think the message has gone out. There's been a strong statement that has been made also by the External Affairs Minister, saying that these are actions that are not acceptable to us. I think at the ground level now we need to militarily change our posture. We need to get much more tactical. We need to, after all, how do you translate national resolve on ground? And it can only be done by your military posture.
Correct.
The rules of engagement that we've had, people going without weapons and moving around with sticks, that needs to quickly change. We can't have our soldiers getting beaten up by rods, and we taking pride in the fact that we've not fired a shot. So I think all this needs to change, and we need to start making plans, Tanvi, on what happens if the situation does not ease off. And I don't see it easing off very easily. What are the military options that can be exercised? I'm not saying they should immediately come on the table. We can keep them aside for now. But our planning and preparations need to be made from now on.
Oh, absolutely. Not a word that I disagree with you on, what you've just said, General Hooda. The second aspect of which is about my second question, which was, should this be dealt with purely military, or if the political leadership has stepped in with the External Affairs Minister now making that call and releasing that message. General Kulkarni, how do we handle it politically from here? And like General Hooda was saying, perhaps should there be some space left for a military reaction as well?
Firstly, I must say that this barbaric act has actually exposed China, and the Chinese have lost the goodwill. There is no doubt on that score. Secondly, I must emphasize, and I go along with General Hooda to say, the terrain favors the defender. There is no denying the fact, terrain favors the defender, and we must change our tactics. We must be holding our ground, show our resolve, and there is no question of China being able to do anything, at least on ground is concerned. And having said that, now we realize that what China was all along up to. Even if we have been dealing with Chinese, I have personally been dealing with them in various border person meetings, it's okay. But this kind of barbaric behavior and to be able to do exposes China. China, which believes itself as a whole civilization, conducts itself in this barbaric manner, is definitely exposing it. We must not let China do the military options must be seen as closed for China. If we are able to convey that and we are able to do that on ground, that there are no military options for China, then alone we can find that yes, the diplomatic channels will remain open. Politically, I think the very fact that 22nd and 23rd meet of the Prime Minister with Russians and the Chinese is postponed is indicator that I don't think there would any possibility of a political level talks as of now. So the only option is militarily, we must hold our ground. Diplomatically, the engagements must continue.
Okay, let me actually just take that point across to Mr. Ashok as well. Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, politically we've raised it now. We've taken it to the foreign ministry level, spoken to each other and released statements. Of course, two different versions of that conversation that happened between Mr. Jaishankar and Wang Yi. But what else from here on politically should India's focus be?
Basically, as far as diplomacy is concerned and as far as political action is concerned, the stronger we are able to convey our posture on the border, the stronger we'll be able to deal with the Chinese in political and in diplomatic terms. If we show that we are weak on the border, then I don't think we'll really be able to maintain a very strong diplomatic posture with the Chinese. So I think as far as politics is concerned, what we also need to do is to have unity within our country. Because I think the message also needs to go out to China. They need to understand that the whole country stands with the government, the whole country stands with the army, and that there are no dissensions. The sort of things that we have been seeing yesterday and today in terms of political parties taking pot shots. I think the government needs that much of space, political space, strategic space to be able to make up its own decision, its own mind and carry forward. Negotiations of this nature or even other negotiations, they cannot be conducted through the media. And the people of the country or the opposition of the country, in my view, does not need to be informed of each particular step. I think the government should have that possibility to maintain confidentiality and secrecy. So I think here we need the opposition also to be brought onto the same page, told what is happening, what is the general macro approach as far as the government is concerned. The message has to go very clearly and strongly to the Chinese that the whole country stands as one when dealing with China on this particular aspect. So I think this is very, very essential. Of course, going forward, the more is your military posture will be stronger, your diplomatic posture will be stronger if you're economically strong within as far as the country is concerned. So I think that is something going forward that we really need to focus on. And of course, as far as the external balancing is concerned, we have strategic partnerships, strategic cooperative relationships with a large number of countries, because I think if the message goes to China, today it is quite isolated, although it might consider that this is a strategic opportunity for it, that all the other countries are dealing with this pandemic, while China has for much in a very significant manner has been able to deal with the pandemic and also has been able to kickstart its economy, while most of the other countries, particularly the larger ones, whether it is America, whether it is Europe or India, they are still struggling both with the pandemic as well as with the economy. So, it feels that there is this strategic opportunity
Okay.
that it can do what it wants, whether in South China Sea, with Taiwan, with Hong Kong, and on the India-China border. So I think China has to be disabused of
Okay,
this.
okay.
It is isolated.
Yes, well, one would have thought of, with all the adventurism that China has displayed in terms of expanding their presence in this entire zone with the whole controversy over COVID and China being blamed for it would have been enough to isolate them. But with China, one doesn't know. They find other ways to distract the world, and they're finding an opportunity in this to, perhaps attempt to gain further ground. But let me move on to the third question, because I have two generals on this panel and I would like to know their views on the military aspect of it. First up, if I could before that go to Snehesh, who's also joining us right now, an expert journalist when it comes to these issues. Some of the details that have come out are extremely brutal about how this clash really took place. The fact that we had a team of about 50 people, some reports suggest, that went to this location where the Chinese were supposed to be withdrawing, but we discovered that they had actually set up a structure there, that structure that had to be demolished, and suddenly there was an onslaught of the Chinese soldiers. And of course, some details vary from one to the other, but this whole clash that went on for hours together was with clubs and poles and barbed wires, and we've ended up with such a high casualty count on both sides. What is your own reading, of the casualties and what that signify for the kind of clash that may have unfolded there? What have you found out actually from your sources?
As far as the casualties on the Indian side is concerned, the figure stands at 20 Indian soldiers who were killed in action in this particular clash with the Chinese troops on Monday evening. There have been 4 soldiers who were critical. The news has just come in about a few minutes back that they are stable. Another about 35 soldiers had also received serious injuries, but they are also stable. So the casualty figure as of now is 20 on the Indian side. The Indian sources within the government as well as the army have mentioned that there has been casualties on the Chinese side too. Remember that Prime Minister Narendra Modi today said in a speech, and I quote him in Hindi, he said the 20 soldiers marte marte mare hain. Those were his exact words used by the Prime Minister. There have been casualties on the Chinese side. The Chinese have not accepted the casualties yet. However, in terms of numbers, but remember that even in the 1962 war, the Chinese never accepted their casualties. It was only in 1994 when they declassified certain papers that the casualty figures really came out. And the casualty figures were very significant. Given the fact that, in 1962, the Chinese were able to overrun us. The figure of the Chinese casualties are still not known, but sources say, based on the intercepts, based on the observation of the number of stretchers that were brought in, the helicopter movement, what I would not like to speculate about exact figures on the exact figures. What I think is on the Chinese side, but I can say that it was significant casualty figures on the Chinese side. Back to you.
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, like you said, perhaps we will never even know what the exact figure is, knowing China. But the numbers vary from 35 to 40, 45. There was significant activity a day after the clash, which perhaps shows that they were pulling back there and evacuating their dead bodies as well. But General Hooda, the fact that, like you also said, this is an area where at the frontal part, soldiers don't take their weapons. Usually are not allowed to take their weapons. This is a clash that seems to have happened as a hand-to-hand fight with stones and blunt objects, and we've still ended up with such high number of casualties. Now, what does that tell us about what would have unfolded at that point?
So it's quite obvious that it's been a very brutal kind of fight. The terrain is what it is. Temperatures are freezing. I'm told people fell into the Galwan River. It's an area where helicopter casualty evacuation is extremely difficult. I can just imagine the scenario where soldiers have clashed against each other at night. Nobody knows exactly what is going on, how many people have got injured, trying to evacuate casualties. So, it could well be that whatever unfortunate casualties have occurred on our side have happened because of the manner in which, the weapons, the basic weapons that they use, the clubs, batons with, spikes, etc., etc. I think the larger issue, Tanvi, is that protocols are breaking down. Why were the Indian Army soldiers moving without weapons? It's because there has been a protocol along the border that whenever something happens and two patrols come face to face, then there must be peaceful disengagement. People must go back. There must be no tailing of patrols. And these are protocols that have withstood the test of time, which is why we have in the past been saying that, since 1975, not a shot has been fired in anger along the LAC. But obviously, this time, and not only the latest incident at Galwan, but starting from 5th, 6th May, when the Chinese intruded into our territory, even at that time, there were violent clashes, large number of injuries. So I think we now need to be clear. If this is going to become the norm, then our own behavior, and that's why I said also in the first part of this, that our rules of engagement need to change. We need to now be much more clear about what we are dealing with and how we need to behave.
All right, I completely take your point. The rules of engagement need to change. Fact of the matter is, if we are following the protocol and if we are not, carrying our guns, and that's been the norm, but the other side keeps breaking the norm and then attacks us in such a manner, in such a brutal fashion, then perhaps it is not advisable. You mentioned the terrain, and I actually wanted to ask both of you on that. General Hooda, if you can just shed some more light on it, the altitude, the lack of oxygen, the remoteness of this area, how difficult it is to even get there, even for helicopters, just how difficult it makes even for the best of the soldiers, which is what we have, to be on and survive on this terrain, let alone just fight.
Yeah, Tanvi, it's extremely challenging. Actually, when you look at some pictures of Eastern Ladakh, you tend to feel this looks like a desert and a plain area, but that desert and plain area, goes to heights of 15, 16,000 feet. General Kulkarni has actually served in Siachen in, during the initial times, so in possibly the most challenging conditions. Your oxygen levels are 50%.
Yes.
Soldiers are supposed to acclimatize for up to 14 days before they can even induct in this area. The Galwan River Valley that we are talking about has no roads, no tracks in that area. People have to walk and get there, and that's why if you have a clash in this area, thinking about easy evacuation of casualties is a big challenge. So this is an area that actually saps you physically. In some ways, it saps you mentally, and so really hats off to soldiers who are there in this area, facing off the Chinese and making sure that they don't intrude further into our area.
Oh yes, while the Eastern Front and the Galwan Valley itself is extremely difficult and treacherous, sub-zero temperatures. Siachen, of course, is a completely different matter altogether. General Hooda, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. I believe you have to, leave a little early, but thank you so much for joining us. Nehesh, in fact, I wanted to come to you on this aspect as well, because fact of the matter is a lot of soldiers succumbed with their injuries later. and the temperature, the extreme climate on what is also known as, the highest of the battlefields would have played a part in that as well.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But before coming to this, General Hooda, raised a very important issue, which was on the rules of engagement. Now, the government, the authorities in the government, both at the military and in the government itself, they are now reviewing the rules of engagement. Now, this is a story that has just broken in the evening, where in which the authorities are now relooking at the standard operating procedures as well as the rules of engagement. Right now, the rules, as per the practice, none of the sides carry firearms with them. This is drawn from the 1996 agreement between India and China, in which it was mentioned that there would be no shots, there would be no firing that would take place in 2 kilometers from the LAC. In terms of even for hunting purposes itself. So this current rules of engagement is inspired from the 1996 agreement. So now there's a relook. And why there's a relook is because, as General Hooda rightly mentioned, in the past, the protocols have been adhered to by both sides. However, earlier last month, when there was a clash in the Pangong area, it was found that the Chinese had used the same kind of medieval weapons. It's really funny because imagine it's both are nuclear powered countries, both have state of the art weapon systems with them, but at the end of the day, the Chinese soldiers were using clubs, were using sticks with barbed wires and nails on them. And for example, I was told by the authorities that had the Indian patrol team was aware of the fact that the Chinese were carrying weapons, then there would have been a different standard operating procedure SOP that would have been followed. The fact is that this group of about 40 to 50 Indian soldiers, led by the commanding officer of the 16 Bihar, went to the spot without any weapons. It was because they were expecting the Chinese to do the same. However, now because of this particular development, there is now a relook at the SOPs and SOPs that is being followed along the LOC. As far as injuries and deaths is concerned, yes, you were very right that the climate, the nature also had a huge role in the casualty figures. For example, this fight that happened between both sides happened on a cliff, and as has been reported by me earlier also that during this fight, some people were pushed off the cliff, some slipped and fell into the water. The water is icy cold. Despite the fact that this is June, the water was icy cold. When the soldiers fell into the water, they fell onto the rocks that are there in the water, injuring themselves. And since it happened during the night, remember that the rescue took place only on Tuesday morning. And many of the soldiers who've been killed in action in this have died not just due to the injuries, but also hypothermia. So yes, the climate plays a huge role. Remember that the area where we are talking about is at about 14,600 feet above the sea level. So this is a completely different kind of a ball game when it comes to deployment of fighting. Even for that matter, when additional troops had to be brought in, they had to undergo certain acclimatization process which lasts for about 2 weeks. And hence, we have the system where we have soldiers in reserves who are moved to the front, and then more soldiers are put in reserves and acclimatized. So yes, the terrain, the atmosphere, the climate, is actually plays a huge role and had played a role in the high casualty figures on the Indian side.
General Kulkarni, would you like to add to this? The what the terrain does, the part that it plays, especially in the location where this happened.
Tanvi, at the very outset, I must say that most of them have covered very well as to what the kind, but the terrain is absolutely inhospitable. Absolutely inhospitable. It is, when we would be training our boys, we would be telling them very clearly, it's a very small thing and it might surprise you, that we would be telling them, don't be a Gama in the land of Lama. It was indicative that don't try and think that you can walk fast, run fast. It's got to be taken very slowly. And until and unless the troops are fully acclimatized, it's very difficult because you could be suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema, you could be suffering from snow blindness, you could be suffering from chilblains, some blisters, you have all kinds of hallucinations because you're operating between above 14,000 feet and the terrain itself is absolutely stony. You won't see a blade of grass over there. And very steep slopes. If somebody was to be pushed, you actually would go into that fast-flowing river. The water is absolutely cold. Temperatures at night, minus 15 degrees today. You can well imagine during the day, the temperatures could go as high as 20 degrees. And by night, it is minus 15 degrees. Just see the body, the adaptability of the body. The people will not be able to eat. Sometimes you just find that you can't eat for whatever the reasons it may be. So you find that terrain is inhospitable, but should the troops be acclimatized? Should the troops know how to go about it? Well, this is the terrain and defenders terrain. You can take on anybody from once you're occupying heights, the terrain is it is the defenders' paradise. And the troops are acclimatized, it is a defender's battle. There is no way, I assure you, trust the forces that are there. These people are so alert, fully acclimatized, they know exactly how to go about it. And I can tell you, just the media, the people who talk all about it, just hold your horses, see to what is going to happen. I can assure you that our forces are going to come out victorious for a very simple reason. They've been there for many, many years. They know how to go about it. And one need not worry. The terrain is what the defender requires. And we can give bloody nose to anybody who is occupying. If they are occupying heights, anybody down below cannot survive over there.
Oh, absolutely, General Kulkarni. Absolutely no doubts about that. For years and decades now, we've protected our borders, in this terrain, whether it's in Siachen or in Kargil. We've won wars, claimed our land back during the Kargil war. And I completely believe the fact that we are the best even at this high altitude. The reason why I've spent so much time talking about this and asking all of you experts to give more details is for people to understand, for people who take it so lightly about what our soldiers are doing there, for people who don't know the extreme weather conditions, the high altitude, what it really takes to be there and to be guarding us day in, day out, through the night and at those temperatures, to be fighting an enemy, to not even have a gun but to fight back and push them back, kill them if it is required. That is what an Indian soldier is about. And for anybody else to sit and then pass judgment and to raise questions about what happened and how did it reach this place, I simply wanted to highlight, for those ignorants to know exactly what the ground realities are and how we are still doing this and doing it so bravely and so beautifully. Now, let's move to the other aspect, which is the kind of build-up that we've seen post this clash. Of course, there's activity that's happened on our end. The Ladakh highway was shut today for civilians. Only the military movement was allowed. There was quite a bit of activity from where our correspondent was in Ladakh, in Leh itself. On the Chinese side, and these are the images that have actually been put out by Planet Labs, and then Times of India had actually shared them, the images of the Galwan Valley, that area where this clash took place. And these pictures are actually, the satellite images are from hours after the clash happened, which shows significant activity and build-up on the Chinese front. Now, again, General Kulkarni, to you before I go to our other panelists, what do we make of this? The fact that we already had so much of troop deployment in the last 6 weeks, a giant build-up from both ends, and now we are adding to it.
Tanvi, the Chinese have come fully prepared. There is no denying the fact. The very fact that these pictures have been shown, it could well be a propaganda, it could well be whatever they desire. The Chinese have been rehearsing, exercising on the Tibetan plateau since the beginning of this year. So they know exactly what is required to be done. And it is premeditated. There is no denying. They know exactly. They don't work in knee-jerk reactions. They have seen how it is. They're testing waters. They're wanting to see how Indians would react. Now, they have seen how we have reacted If we have suffered casualties, they have also suffered casualties. Now they will see how do the world react to what they have done, and then you will find the action take. But they're fully prepared, they've come prepared, they know what they require. It is, you can have any number of troops over there. It's a huge plain area, absolute desert at their end. The better part of this is the terrain on our side is extremely difficult. It's real high altitude from the point of view that it is mountainous, it is inhospitable. The terrain on their side, comparatively, yes, high altitude, it has 5,000 meters, but it's plain, so they can gather there. But the point of application is where it matters. You cannot, even if you have any number of troops, you got to go to the small gullies, lanes, valleys. It's not so easy. Even the highway that we all talk about, this particular highway, that 219 of theirs, is approximately 100 kilometers, and on road it is about 125 to 170 kilometers from where we are. But there are feeder roads that come along, and they are approximately about 20 odd kilometers behind LAC. So they have come prepared. They know what it is. Logistically, they are there exactly what it is. They have come there. Why? They want to acclimatize. They know that it is not possible for them to fight at this particular altitude without getting acclimatized. And hence, if we are holding our ground, we are firm, we know what it is to be done, we know the terrain, and as I've always been saying, terrain favors the defender. We need not worry one bit.
Actually, Snehesh, if I can come to you before I go across to Mr. Ashok, there is, of course, now we are strengthening and boosting our presence all along the LOC in the 5 key states at least, where in the past we've had trouble, especially in Sikkim and Arunachal and in Ladakh as well. What is it that you've also, picked up on the kind of build-up that is happening post-clash now?
Well, as General Kulkarni said, there is no doubt about the fact that the Chinese came in very well planned, and they had the first movers advantage. But that was only in the initial few days. Since then, India has gone ahead and initially did what is called as mirror deployment. Now, mirror deployment means that the Indian side matches every single move of the China with theirs. So, for example, in a particular location, if the PLA has built 50 tents and has about 50 brought in men in about 50 vehicles, India has done the same. However, now, as per the latest information, is that in terms of play of strength, if in actual numbers on the ground, I can say that the Indian Army is much larger in numbers. The more equipment, more men have been brought in from various other sectors into Eastern Ladakh, and is rightly mentioned. There has been a forward movement as a defensive measure all along the LOC, not just limited to Eastern Ladakh, but also in the central, the Himachal sector, the central sector, as well as in the eastern part of the country too. So in terms of deployment, the deployment is large. But if you're asking what happened immediately after this particular clash on Monday evening, I'll refer you to the statement issued by the Indian Army on Tuesday evening. The statement began with the fact that there has been de-escalation by both sides in the Galwan Valley. So, concerned, the de-escalation has taken place. Post, there are still certain issues that need to be, gotten over with, and hence yesterday also there was GOC. Level talks that happened. It happened today also, and I'm told that it will take place tomorrow too. In the Galwan Valley, there are certain issues that need to be catered to. However, the situation now moves away from Galwan to Finger area, and where the real issue is, because the Chinese are sitting at a particular point, Finger 4, they've captured the heights as well as on the plain. But that is an issue that is being taken care of. But in terms of whether there has been any escalation since the clash on Monday, I have no information which suggests so that there has been any kind of escalation. Back to you.
Well, thank you so much for all of those details, and really putting it in perspective as well for our viewers. Now, if there is one other topic and one other question that I wanted answered here, which is, and we've touched upon it briefly, which is the impact it will now have on the India-China ties. I think that stage has been set with the MEA statement that came out, which very clearly said it will have a serious impact on the bilateral ties. Now, India and China bilateral ties are, I mean, the economic part of it is itself so big. About $95 billion worth of trade really happens between the two countries, viewers, irrespective of all the rhetoric that you see about boycotting Chinese goods or stopping Chinese goods. Fact of the matter is a large number of the Indian startup companies have Chinese investments, and that's how they've gotten about their businesses. About $5.5 billion investment in the Indian startups. The net Chinese investment in our businesses in our country is about $8 billion. That also as of 2017. I'm not even talking about that. And of course, both of us are leading in, China is actually a leading investor in about 16 of 29 of India's unicorns. Then there is a diplomatic part, and even the Modi government itself has worked significantly when it comes to the diplomatic ties with China. Prime Minister Modi and President Xi have actually met 18 times since Prime Minister Modi first came to power in 2014. So there is a lot at stake. Then there are, of course, the geopolitical reasons. So the question that I want to ask Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar is, what happens to these ties, the bilateral ties, when we say it will be a serious impact? What could it be?
Well, Tanvi, I think that's a very good question. And let me sort of, because let's parse it into a couple of different areas. So first, as you mentioned, are the economic ties between the two countries. First, we have to look at what is the trade relationship, what is the trade partnership between the two countries. And then you mentioned briefly also about the investment by China into India. So first, as far as trade is concerned, you would recall that, it's in the range of about 85 billion dollars, but it is heavily skewed. It is heavily tilted in favor of China. They have a trade surplus of about 55 to 60 billion dollars. While they export about 70 odd billion dollars to us, we export only about 10 to 15 billion dollars to them. So there's a huge trade deficit that India has with China. It is unsustainable. We have told China in no, like many of the other countries, particularly the United States has also been saying that China has been gaming the WTO, the World Trade Organization provisions. So while it is taking benefit of access into the markets of other countries, but it keeps its own market closed. Similar is the case as far as India is concerned. So whether it is areas where we have strength, whether it is pharmaceutical, whether it's agricultural products, whether it is information technology, enabled services, etc. So the doors are closed, and we are able to export our goods which are quality, which are competitive to all the world. For instance, that with the United States, we have that's the largest trading partner, about 150 billion dollars, and we have a trade surplus both in the area of goods as well as in the area of services, but not with China, which is our next door neighbor. So that is a huge element as far as our bilateral relationship is concerned. Now, you said very rightly yourself that there have been lots of movements, boycott China, boycott Chinese products, etc. But it has not really happened. It has not really taken off in the past because there has not been a concerted action in that sense. But I think this 15th of June, that is really, as I mentioned, as the other panelist also mentioned, I think this is a watershed. So this will have to be a comprehensive sort of an approach. The other aspect, that I would like to emphasize in this aspect is, there are a large number of areas where earlier, all of us are aware, whether it's festivals, the statues and images of gods and goddesses, Ganesh, Lakshmi, etc. Everything of these come from China. They don't really account for very much as far as the total trade relationship is concerned, but there are a number of items. For instance, pharmaceuticals. As far as our antibiotics are concerned, about 70% of the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, they come from China. Now, why do they come from China?
Correct.
Because earlier we used to make all these APIs in India. All the IDPLs, the Indian Drug and Pharmaceuticals Limited, they used to produce this, but because China is able to produce them cheaper, so all our factories were closed and we were buying it from them. You would recall that in one of his interactions, the Prime Minister himself had mentioned that, where our production of masks at one time, just before the pandemic, was zero. Very quickly, we were able to ramp it up to more than 2 lakh units per day. Similar is the case with PPE. So not only were we able to meet our domestic requirements, but we could also make a presence in the export market. The point I'm making is many of these things, it is not rocket science. They are items that we can definitely manufacture. We have been doing it. But now I think both in terms of getting a comparative advantage, because we have a huge market, we have a huge export market, I think that is where we can definitely do. Some areas, there might be some pain. I think we should be willing, for strategic reasons, for security reasons, we should be willing to bear that pain. There are other aspects of technology, for instance, the Huawei, for the 5G technology. I think that is something that is very close to as far as China is concerned. It definitely would like the huge, growing, expanding market of India as far as fresh technology is concerned. So I think that is an area definitely where we can put. And the last point, allow me to make, Tanvi, here is, as far as investments are concerned, the government has already taken a stand, and it has said that all investments coming from neighboring countries, and of course, China is not mentioned by name, but it is implied that they will not go through the automatic route, but it will be the government which will go. It will have to undergo scrutiny for each and every investment that comes into India. So I think on the economic front, there are a number of actions.
You're right there, and I'm
take.
sure that was one of the steps, Mr. Sajjanhar, that also irked the Chinese when we put them on that list. Saying you will need our approval before the FDI really comes in. But it's easier said than done. You also mentioned that point. We will have to take some tough decisions. It's not so easy to simply just say, okay, let's not buy Chinese lambs or Chinese idols, because our pharmaceutical industry so far largely depends on them. We ran into trouble during the lockdown and when the pandemic started, because we weren't able to import from China at that point of time. Even now, as recent as 15th of June, there are reports that have emerged of a Chinese company bidding for the Delhi Merit project, which has obviously even irked the RSS economic arm, and they have raised objection to it. But if it's the lowest bid, then there has to be a very concerted, clear policy saying, irrespective of that, we don't mind giving it to somebody who probably charges us more and doesn't give as good a deal, but not to China. So that probably will entail a very large-scale change in policy that can only be initiated by the center. But I am completely out of time, and I'm going to thank all of our guests for joining us. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for taking our questions and really decoding and demystifying it for our viewers, where our only attempt is to arm our viewers with all the information. We don't want fear, we don't want paranoia, we don't want anybody to go into a hyperbolic reaction. We don't want, simple rhetorical claims, misleading people. We simply want to give you the information and facts. And we are not done yet. I've only done 6 questions. There are 4 more to go. And the conversation goes on the other side. So stay here with me on Urban Debate.